Does the thought of launching a new product fill you with anxiety? Well, you're not alone. Many business owners really worry about everything relating to budget blowouts to just totally missing the mark with those customers. But imagine if you could iron out those wrinkles with expert precision, if you could sidestep all those all too common design traps and handle it like a pro. Well, that's exactly why I'm thrilled to have Rob Law on the show today. He's the genius behind Trunki, the children's travel product that's taken the world by storm. And after a legendary snub on BBC's Dragon's Den, Rob didn't just bounce back, he turned Trunki into a global phenomenon with millions sold worldwide. And Rob's not just a survivor of the rocky terrain of product design, he's a conqueror. He transforms every challenge into a victory and has done so whilst also making sure that he's protecting his own health and well-being and that of his family as well. And so today he's here to unpack the secrets of his success. So if you're eager for actionable insights and some inspiring stories to help you master the art of stress-free product design, then this episode is for you. Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual, and today I'm joined by Rob Law, master inventor and serial entrepreneur. Welcome, Rob.
Morning, Alexis. That's some introduction.
Well, let's dive in because there's so much of your background and career that we could explore. But I know from a presentation of yours that I saw at an event that we were both at, where I think you even started with a video from the famous Dragon's Den pitch that you did. Give us that high level of where that existed in your journey and how that led to your success with Trunki and kind of how your philosophies evolved over the years. And I appreciate that's a tough ask, given that I think your presentation was a half an hour session in its own when we met last.
Sure. Well, Dragon's Den was 2006. So as we record today, it was close to 18 years ago. We celebrate Trunki's birthday as the 5th of May, 2006, which is when 1,600 Terence and Trixie, the pink and blue Trunkies, arrived in Avonmouth docks. I finally quit my job as design consultant and went full-time on Trunki. 2 weeks later, I was in the studios filming Dragon's Den. I went in asking for £100,000 for 10% of my business. So yeah, that's a £1 million valuation. And the pitch went perfectly. I towed Richard Farley around the studio on it until it ended up at Theo Pathetis' feet, and now a bit of TV gold, I believe, where he pulls off the toe strap and all the dragons absolutely lambast me with "your business is worthless, you can't protect your idea, you shouldn't come on here with problems," and all sorts of other ridiculous comments thrown at me. So I left the den kind of empty-handed. Richard Farley, who was actually my target because he had toddlers, saw that everyone else had gone out, so he tried to get half my business for the £100,000, which there was no way I could go close to. So yeah, I left empty-handed, and by the time we got to the bottom of the steps, I actually was wishing I'd invented a time machine and not a ride-on suitcase. So that's what sprung Trunki into the popular culture in the UK. But taking a step back, I came up with a concept for Trunki, the ride-on suitcase, at university where I was studying product design, and that was way back in 1997. And as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed second-year design student, our class was asked to enter a national luggage design competition that was sponsored by a large plastics manufacturer. And I went off to the local department store looking for inspiration. Found myself in the luggage section looking at all these dark, boring suitcases, but hard-moulded suitcases were quite fashionable at the time. And that was the technology that we were really learning a lot about being design students, the injection moulding side of making products. But kind of drifted off, lacking inspiration, and found myself in the kids' toy department. I am still a large kid at heart. And it was there looking at the ride-on toys, reminiscing on how my younger brother used to love riding his ride-on tractor around the garden relentlessly. And these products were made using rotational moulding, which is a different technique that wastes a lot of the internal space. And thought, why not use the technology used in the adult suitcases to make a ride-on toy that maximizes that internal storage that could also function as a piece of luggage. Having travelled a lot, I saw lots of bored kids in airports. I didn't have kids at the time, but I thought that was a novel idea. Went on to win the competition, And the judges took me aside and said, you know what, Rob, you've got quite a commercial idea here. You should try and license it to a manufacturer. I thought that sounds like an amazing idea. I'll be able to get someone to do all the hard work, do all the marketing, sales, everything else, and I'll just sit on the beach sipping cocktails. Brilliant. So I approached a luggage manufacturer. The luggage manufacturer told me I'd invented a toy. Approached toy manufacturers. They told me I'd invented a piece of luggage. And I just couldn't get anyone to take it on. I did finally secure a global licensing deal with a toy company who did a really bad job. They only got sales in Saudi Arabia, of all places, and then they went bust. So kind of after that, I was at the peak of my design career, got to exactly where I wanted to be, but was getting bored and struggling to get out of bed because I was using my power of good design just to create more landfill that people didn't really need. And I was starting to become quite disillusioned. And then when I picked up the phone to the ex-managing director saying that they'd gone into liquidation, I just thought, well, I've been working with a lot of big FMCG brands. I really starting to understand more about the power of branding. Trunki just needs a strong brand behind it, and the rest should be history. So I thought I'd have a stab myself, and that then takes us back to Dragon's Den and the whole start.
Amazing. And since then, so, and because I want to come back to sort of your approach to design, because I know that what firstly stands out to me is the length of time between the initial idea and getting to the point of even Dragon's Den, never mind what then happened next, was a long period. And I think that there's almost a bit of received wisdom out there around the whole licensing as a model, this idea that, oh, well, if you've got a good idea, like license it to someone else and then they can run with it. And it reminds me a little bit of franchising as a model, where it's like, in theory, that's fantastic. But in practice, you do have to make the business work first. Like, you have to work out, like, what does the brand need to look like, and what's the ideal customer, and what's the route to market, and so on, so that when you then do license it, that someone could do a good job of it. Unless you can, get someone that's already proven.
Yeah, because of Dragon's Den, I get quite a lot of people contact me trying to get advice on their business, and it's quite frustrating having gone through the product design training where you've got to have 1,000 ideas to have one good one. And then you're getting bombarded by people who are sitting on a sofa, think of an idea in their head and think they should get £1 million for it. And they've done absolutely no work at all. Ideas are completely worthless. Ideas that turn into physical products that have a clear marketing strategy, a brand, have been prototyped. You understand how they can be manufactured. And most importantly, you've got a very clear market segment that want to buy it. Then you have something that might have some value. And that's a huge amount of work to do.
Indeed. And that's always been an interesting thing for me, like for example, with my software businesses, has been seeing that journey of product design as something that I think it can be easy from the outside to see it as quite simple, because, or at least should be quick, because you go, well, it's just, anyone can draw up a website these days, or, anyone can draw this. And of course, the reality is, as you say, the amount of iteration and sort of first versions and different ideas you have to start with before you can even get to that breakthrough. And it can be quite a painful process. And in fact, let's dive into that a little bit more. So, as you say, your background was sort of product design, product development as your training, your career, and so on, before you then went into that essentially as your business. Can you talk us through a bit of that process? Because for some people, for business owners, for some of them, the concept of designing and building a product is something that's like, oh, well, yeah, I just start creating it, and there's not a process that they follow to do it. So how do you visualize that? What are the steps that you go through to make sure that A, it's not as painful as it might otherwise be, and B, you've got actually quite a good chance of success?
Yeah, so I guess I had the skill set and knowledge of how to take an idea into reality, and that was around sketching down the idea, creating models, initially scale small models to look at the form and functionality, and then actually you kind of use insulation foam, that blue foam, to sculpt a full life-size kind of prototype that was more around, is this the right size for kids to sit on, and what age kids should I be looking at? So it's more of an ergonomic prototype. And then you create renderings and bring the product really to life, but you're thinking through all the engineering steps of how can that bit be made, how's that going to function. But you can get freelancers or design consultancies to do that for you. The most important part of any product development, software, product, whatever, is talking to customers about it and getting their feedback. So a great example with Trunki was I launched Trunki with just a toe strap and no handles on the top because my research had said children shouldn't carry heavy bags because it can damage their spine. So I took away the ability to carry the product. And then I got bombarded by customer emails saying, put some bloody carry handles on it. I'm a parent and I'm having to carry this thing. So then Trunki had these carry handles. But yeah, you'll never ever think of the final solution, and you've got to go through that design iteration process and then consumers feedback. I mean, we had our Trunki second best-selling products, a pair of children's reins that stops children running off into the road and things, keeps them safe. And actually we'd done all this prototyping design development, and then we went out to various people and started filming how they were using it before we launched the product. And it had a grab handle on the back. The idea was you could just grab the child on the reins to stop them running off. And all the dads picked their kids up and did a Superman with the carry handle, which was hilarious. And then it was like, oh my God, that buckle is nowhere near strong enough to restrain that. So we had to remove the handle from the product. So yeah, the insights you get from real life use are way beyond what you could ever imagine. And it's so important. Yet so many shed inventors think their idea is so valuable they shouldn't tell anyone about it. Yeah. So their product never ever iterates or develops. I've got one that springs to mind where a guy had invented an idea of a suitcase that turns into a deck chair to save yourself €5 a day. It's like, okay, what happens to all the sand that's in your suitcase, and how do you get it down to the beach? Have you talked to anyone about it? Oh no, I can't talk to anyone because I've got a patent on it. It's like, well, start talking to some people and find out if anyone wants to buy this.
It's a tricky balance, isn't it? Because I mean, certainly my experience is that people are on the wrong side of this balance pretty consistently towards not talking to customers. I think one of the most common things I see is people saying, oh, well, I am the target customer, or I've been the target customer for this long, and so I do know it. Or there's someone a friend of mine who's currently building a software business, and he kind of asked a bit of my advice. And one of the concerns, or one of the feedback I said was, get customer feedback early. And he was saying, oh, well, it's okay. I've got this sort of co-founder who she's, that's all her background. She essentially is the customer. So she's kind of making sure that it's built for her. And I always think that's a big mistake for loads of reasons. But I think your point around there are the ways in which your customer will use your product or envisage using your product that you never quite realized, and those little insights can make or break it.
And you've got to filter through it, because some insights aren't that useful and some are incredibly useful. But also, you should not talk to friends and family. Well, you can, but don't take anything they say, because it's always going to be biased. People don't want to see you fail, and they're all going to sugarcoat their feedback. So you've just got to get out there to the real market. I mean, if it's a physical product, you go and stand outside Tesco's and ask people who are walking into the shop or whatever, or a shop that is relevant to your product, and talk to shopkeepers if it's a product they might want to stock. Yeah, you've just got to get out there and talk to people. Don't be precious. No one's going to copy your idea until you're successful. To get successful, you've got to do all this stuff and then be in the market for a little while before you get copied. So don't worry.
Yeah, and that's a whole other topic we could talk about, because I know from your history, you've had a very rich history of being copied and having to fight all of that. And that's something that I've experienced with my software businesses too. And I try and take the positive frame of reference, but it's very flattering. It's very flattering if you've got to this point and people want to copy you. But going back to that customer feedback point, because I like that you highlight around the be careful with the friends and family feedback. I think there's a great book, The Mom Test, where essentially the entire premise is be very careful about asking your mom, your mother, like, what do you think? Because of course you get that, oh yeah, I think it's great, you'll be very successful. And instead you need to be getting that feedback through and asking the right questions. For something like product design, I think there's a temptation to feel like, oh, well, I can't put it in front of someone until I've got it to this particular stage. Because, for example, you might say, oh, well, if I just gave someone a piece of normal luggage and said, right, but now imagine it as a toy, or I got the toy, but said, now imagine that but you can put things in it. I suspect there are lines of where you do need to kind of get to a particular point so that you can get decent feedback. Do you have any sort of advice or steps at which you'd say, yeah, there's some key milestones at which point you should be getting that feedback?
Yeah, well, it's a slightly tricky one. You can test the idea of the concept with some words. That's always useful. Visuals always bring something to life, but if the visuals kind of people then think that's what it looks like when it's just a concept, and it's not going to look like that. It's just trying to bring it to life. So it's always a bit of a balancing act. And then you can almost animate sometimes, like create an animation that explains how a service might be used, for instance. And it's just putting the feelers out all the time. I mean, with my new business, ZP, which is nurturing natural sleep, so we merge media, electronic devices to help children and families get more sleep. And we saw a gap in the market. There's a market leader called the Grow Clock, and that had innovated for like 20 years, and it had the wrong color at night, and it was not actually that helpful for kids to sleep with a bright blue light in their room. So we created a new product that flipped the lights around and has a more comforting amber light at night, and then blue in the morning to stop that melatonin production and help wake the kids up. But this was a niche market that didn't really have much competition, so we were pretty confident we could go to market with an improved product, but we just didn't know. So we started asking for a bit of feedback, but it was quite easy and quick to get to market. So we just wanted to get it live to see if there was a product market fit. We put it on Amazon only, tested the market, and we became the second bestseller within 3 weeks. So product market fit, tick, done. Amazing to read through the reviews, which are all completely independent, and really analyze those. And yeah, then you kind of iterate and move forward. So there's new features we want to improve with our product, like a USB-C we've had feedback on to charge it, and lots of other bits and pieces. So you can also do it that way if it's fairly easy to get a product to market. But actually, on that thread, as you said, I've been copied a lot. Trunki, the suitcase, has been copied like 60 times. So we have a vision of what the all singing, all dancing ZP product's going to be, but we're not going to launch that for a couple of years.
Right.
We're going to take iterations so that knowing the competition are going to be copying us, they can just copy the last version, and then we can keep bringing out the next version with more features and more benefits. So it's just starting with something quite basic. And it's a very different way of thinking from my training being a product designer, where you want to launch the all singing, all dancing product, but actually you can get to market with a low hanging fruit and just start testing. So that testing, product market fit, iterate is now the kind of new gospel I'm going by.
Yeah, nice. And it's something that it sort of reminds me of the minimum viable product kind of concept of get to market quickly with something, partly so that you can test it and get that feedback and so on. It's an interesting adjustment to that thinking, as you say, Rob, like actually not even just so that you can start testing, but so that you can think, I suppose partly it means that you can think bigger on the design because you're not as held back by what might be possible right now, but also, as you say, means that you're a bit more future-proof, you're a bit more protected because you've already got some of that innovation pipeline, which is powerful. Because particularly given that your products have been functional, physical products that are designed to appeal to parents, but also to children, and they have to be safe for children and so on. How do you get that balance between being able to do the kind of the minimum viable product, the thing that you can test, versus having something that's then still safe and okay? Because that can be a challenge. I think I remember, perhaps it was a different Dragon's Den episode, where one of the business owners had got this sort of thick pad for stopping a child slipping down a seat, and I think one of the dragons ripped it apart, showing how that it would easily become a choke hazard. And that's a tricky thing again. And there are other examples in other product areas, like in websites. It's, it might be information security or these sorts of things. Like, how do you make sure that you've got those basics and that you're even aware of what needs to be in there so that you can do a good job and not end up,
Yeah, I think one option will be to talk to the trade association that's relevant for that business, and quite often they'll have some support and guidance for you. So in my market, it's the Baby Products Association, and a couple of the leaders within that organisation sit on the committees that define these safety standards. You can talk to the safety testing houses like SGS or Intertech, and actually they can do a risk assessment on the concept or the product. Right. But to get to market quickly, you've got a huge variety of product to choose from on the likes of Alibaba. If you're not going into a really competitive market, then you could try and source a product that already exists. make a few changes and tweaks to it fairly easily, and then use that as your kind of platform to test the product market fit. What I really love about the likes of Amazon is it's a completely closed ecosystem that has a huge volume of shoppers on, and then you can really quite quickly get testing and getting eyeballs with the advertising on the platform to people to see the product and to test it, rather than beforehand you had to invest huge amounts in social media and marketing and get into retailers, and it's an incredibly complex business. But you can have quite a simple business just to test the initial launch phase.
I think that's really powerful. I think, as you say, there are so many ways in which you can get some of that input and avoid falling into some of those traps where you just create something and assume it'll be right. And as you say, make the mistake of hiding the product from customer eyes or from these trade associations and so on. So
I also guess if you're planning to launch a new product, whether it be product or physical product or service or website or whatever, it takes a huge amount of energy and effort. So you do need to try and carve out enough time to really give this some focus.
Yeah.
It's definitely not a light touch thing. And there's lots of people out there that can help, whether it be on Upwork or Fiverr or whatever. You can source kind of fairly low cost resource to kind of help you iterate that idea and move it along, whether it be a web developer, an app designer or a product designer. Yeah, so it's much easier now to be able to do this kind of stuff, but it does still take an awful lot of time and effort and focus. So yeah, you've really got to carve out that time, because the more effort you put in, the more chance it has of succeeding.
Yeah, great advice. And I think, and particularly to create something that's got real market appeal and as a result can be profitable rather than me too. So I think that's great advice. One of the things, as I've kind of alluded to previously, is that in your journey, you've had a variety of setbacks. We've talked about some very specific major ones. But one of the things that struck me about your journey is how resilient you've been and kind of built that resilience, and how focused you've been on making sure that you're kind of looking after yourself and what you value most and your family and so on. Like, talk me through that journey and perhaps some of the most significant setbacks and how you've been able to adjust to those. Because I know that for many business owners out there, hitting those roadblocks can feel incredibly painful and often lonely. And so I think it's really useful to kind of talk about some of those that have come up for us and what you've done about that.
Sure. Well, I guess the first setback happened at birth, because I was born with a genetic disease called cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
And that was quite a challenging period to being a child and having this condition. And the average life expectancy was kind of teenage when I was born. So my parents didn't have great hopes that I was going to make it to adulthood. But then as the medicine got better, age expectancy got longer, and when I was a teenager, the average life expectancy was then 30. So I was kind of like, well, I'm not going to be around for that long, but I'm going to try and make the most of it. So that's kind of one of the mindsets I've had. And then I lost my twin sister at 15 to cystic fibrosis, and that was a real pivotal moment in my life. Obviously, it was hugely tragic, very upsetting, and I was kind of faced with a choice of being kind of let this be a millstone around my neck and drag me down for the rest of my life, or see it as an opportunity that I've still got my life and I need to make the most of it. And that gave me a huge amount of drive and determination, which has enabled me to just blast through so many challenges and hurdles. And having done that so many times now, I kind of look back and just think, dealing with adversity and challenges is so character building. We learn so much from the negative stuff and failing than we do from succeeding. So really switching that mindset to kind of take on challenges as quickly as you can, or roadblocks, rather than trying to resist them and trying to put them off. You're basically putting off your personal development and your future strength by delaying and procrastinating. So actually see setbacks as opportunities to learn, to develop, to build your character, and to accelerate forwards. And quite often you accelerate forwards in a different direction, having to overcome these challenges, but you end up surpassing them and learning so much. I think one of the common questions I get asked is like, what's your biggest regret and what would you prefer to have not done? And to me, it's a vivid tapestry of experience, and I probably wouldn't undo anything. Take Dragon's Den, for example. If I had invented that time machine, I might be a bit richer, and I wouldn't have been on Dragon's Den, but that turned out to be the best possible thing that could have happened. I couldn't see it then, but we got catapulted into the national psyche and ended up becoming part of almost British popular culture. On TV shows now, on comedy shows, they joke about Trunki occasionally and contraband and things like that. So yeah, it was the best thing that could have possibly happened, but couldn't see that at the time. I also think dealing with these challenges takes a huge amount of effort and focus. And one of the other things I've kind of learned is around you've got to use your energy wisely. And in the summer of 2006, when I first launched Trunki, I came back one night from a really busy day, sat down, turned the telly on, and there was a news flash that the Secret Services had foiled the liquid bomb threat, where people were planning to blow up planes over London. And as a result, the government had decided to ban hand luggage. Kind of my face turned white, turned to my flatmate. What did he just say? He said, oh, they've just banned hand luggage. I said, but I've just launched a children's hand luggage business. So I phoned up Heathrow, I phoned up the Department of Transport. I tried to find out as much as I could about when this ban was going to be lifted. Obviously, no one had a clue. And I quickly learned that I'm wasting my energy trying to figure this out. What I can control is my costs and my marketing message, and try to pivot Trunki for using more staycations and camping. But yeah, I could waste all this energy and have absolutely zero influence and just waste it. Or I could focus on what I can control and conserve that energy for when it is lifted and we can accelerate forwards. And that was played again, obviously, during COVID. And in so many times, yeah, just use that energy wisely, and you can just waste so much time and effort worrying and trying to influence something that's completely out of your control, and it's just complete waste.
Oh, that's such powerful advice, and I think I particularly love that point you made around all those setbacks in your life where, if you could reverse them, would you? Well, no, because they've also led to some of your biggest successes. And how I love the way that you essentially recommend using that to encourage you to accelerate how quickly you hit those issues. Like earlier we're talking about getting customer feedback. One of the concerns that people have is, oh, but what if I get the customer feedback and they don't like it? Or, I get really bad feedback. And of course, it's like, good, get that nice and early then, so that you can learn that, or, launch the product on Amazon and find out that you get 0 sales, or worse, 1, which means you've still got to do all the work, or at least refund them, or so on. And I think
you can do so much testing now. I mean, you can create you can use AI to help you come up with ideas for your brand name, and then you can post that brand name online with customer service like OnePoll or whatever, and get people's feedback on the brand name. And you can kind of use software to come up with loads of different designs for what that might look like. And it's just incredible how many tools are out there to help you try and avoid some of these pitfalls.
Your attitude to business, to product design, and so on, I think it's really pragmatic, whilst also your passion for what you're creating, I think, is clearly there. One of the challenges I see is that for you as a product designer, product inventor at heart, you essentially had to become a more corporate-y business owner that wasn't as involved and hands-on on those. So what was that part of the journey like?
Yeah, so growing up, I wasn't that interested in being a businessman or an entrepreneur. My dad ran his own business, a retail interior designer, and he was a workaholic. So I just decided, no, I'm not going to do that. I want to enjoy my life. And I discovered my passion and became a workaholic with product design, and then later running my own business. I'm also dyslexic, so I kind of quite often, I think it's using common sense, my thinking, but it's a skill set that's quite unique. And I just found the whole business thing, like, it's just one big problem to solve. There's so many little problems, and questioning why people do things. And like early in my career running the business, all offices are really dull and boring. They've got blue carpet, suspended ceilings. Yeah, I've had the privilege of working in design agencies that kind of have really nice environments. So rule number one, I'm going to have a really nice working environment for my team, because clearly they're in a nice environment, they're going to perform better. And then learning about leadership, reading lots of books, trying to understand as much as I could about how to become a good leader, and that's having clear mission, vision, values, having a lot of humility. And at the time, yeah, you're kind of stereotypical Alan Sugars and the like were fierce business people, but I'm not that kind of mindset, and I just use a lot of humility and try to be as down to earth as I can, and that seemed to work really well for me. It was incredible adventure building the team up to about 45 people at peak, and then we acquired the factory that made Trunkis down in Plymouth, and that added another 55 people to the team. So it was quite a large organization. And we had our highs and lows, and it was never constant. I always kind of like to say that success is just a hiatus and a series of defeats. So yeah, once you've hit success, it doesn't carry on in that plateau. You then drop straight back down again. And yeah, we ended up making over 5 million suitcases, sold them in over 100 countries, and yeah, we got some really good brand awareness in a couple of those markets. Never quite conquered America, but had some really interesting adventures across the pond. And then COVID hit, really challenging. We were kind of doing 10 million quid. That fell to 3 million. Following year, 3 million. Had to make some very, very tough business decisions. And then we kind of sprung back out when people were allowed to travel again. Had a really successful year and decided now was the time to sell, because after, we're going to be 18 this year, after 18 years and kind of not seeing eye to eye with our investors, the fund had just completely been pulled away from the business. So it was time to move on. And yeah, it's just a great experience, a great journey. I always thought when I started Trunki, it'll be a great MBA and I'll learn a lot, even if I don't make any money or sell any. Turned out did quite well, but learned so much on that journey. And what I'm really enjoying now is taking that 18 years of experience, putting it into my new business, and we literally launched this new brand within 6 months. I've co-founded it with my brother, so with Trunki I was solo. So much better to be with a co-founder to bounce those ideas off and share the pain and go on the journey with. And at the moment it's just me, my brother, and ChatGPT. It's a team of 3. And the power of AI and how you can really leverage that tool to research, find out, copyright, do so much, an idea bounce. Like I'm finding just talking through ideas with AI, and it comes up with lots of bad ideas, but also 1 or 2 things. Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. So yeah, really powerful tool.
That's amazing. And what's been your experience of having gone from a big team to going to that small team? I can see some of the positives and the freedom, and as you say, you've got ChatGPT and your brother to keep you company and bounce ideas around. But certainly one of the experiences I've had building a business and then starting another one is there are some tasks that I love and have relished, like getting back and stuck into, typically relating to sales and marketing and things like that. But then there's a raft of activities where I'm kind of I remembered that I had handed these things over and liked having a team and so on that would support me on that. And of course, you could decide, you know what, it's just going to cost me a load of money and I'll put that stuff back in. But then you're creating a bloated business too early, and it sounds like that's not been your approach. How have you kind of resolved and coped with that? Is there anything that you've done this time round that means that there's less of the tasks that you don't enjoy?
I think it's more around going slower than I would naturally want to, but there's lots of reasons for that, and it's mainly cash flow. So we can start essentially with an Amazon only business, and then in year 2 we can go out to B2B. But rather than trying to raise all that money to bring in enough stock to be able to supply the retailers who can't accurately forecast for a product that hasn't been on the market before, and then they'll pay you in 90 to 120 days. No, I'm not going to do that to start with. I'm going to get paid every 2 weeks, thank you very much, and grow the demand, improve the product market fit, and also build out more of a product range so that you can then go to retailers as not just a one-trick pony. So yeah, there's lots more marketing we'd love to do, but we're on a tight budget, so we're kind of having to take it a lot slower than I'd like. But equally, we're seeing some great successes, and yeah, it's pretty clear who we might need to hire in the team, but those hires are going to be freelance rather than full-time employees. So yeah, you can have a very virtual team. In my Amazon agency business I run as well, we use a lot of offshore resource, so lots of VAs kind of doing the more mundane tasks. So you can get a lot of talent that can do stuff without taking on that big risk of the payroll.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that's interesting that so you talk about your team as being you, your brother, and ChatGPT, but it sounds like you are also leveraging the kind of VAs, outsourcers, etc. Which increasingly now I just regard that as that's the team. Like there's very little different between employees and not. Yeah, so that's interesting that even with that you have got that team, and it's interesting as well that the way that you describe kind of managing the cash flow and being quite conservative on that. Because one of the things that I see, particularly with serial entrepreneurs, where they've done something great and built up some money or sold the business and got pot of money and so on, is there can be a temptation to throw that money at the next thing to make that go faster. And, you know, you're in a relative position where that must be a temptation when you're like, oh, it's getting a little bit slower than I'd like. Maybe I should, you know, throw a bit more personal cash in here and there. I appreciate that in the product industry, the requirement on cash flow is a lot higher than in some industries. So as you say, particularly if you're talking 90-day, like that's a lot of money regardless. Are there any particular sort of principles that you apply when you're kind of looking at that business planning and particularly because often there is a sense of, oh, well, you've got to invest and then you get the return. Are there any models that you use to make sure that you don't over?
It's kind of quite interesting because we did a bit of modelling, but we just wanted to get going. We saw an opportunity and we just wanted to get that testing done. And then we went for some funding recently, which made us have to look at the cash flow to submit. We'd done a very sketchy cash flow, but actually working through all the numbers, it kind of dawned on us, we really don't have the level of profit that matches our aspirations on how much we want to invest in this business. And you'd have thought, someone who's got 18 years business experience might have already done that, but no, because you just want to, it's fitting it in with all the testing and everything else. So that was really, really useful thing to do, even though we should have done it. And you can have a forecast is just a forecast. I can guarantee you're going to be 100% inaccurate and wrong with your forecast. But it's having a bit of a roadmap of, if this happens, then you can afford this. And if that happens, you can't afford that. So kind of just having a bit of a roadmap that kind of you can check in every month just to see where you are against the forecast, what that means for the cash that's being spat out, and what decisions you might then have to make or delay further down the road. But you could spend all your time building this amazing forecast, but it's only ever going to be wrong. So it has to be built in a way that you can easily adjust and adapt it. And also the thinking around the business, because it's so new. When we applied for this funding 3 months ago, the business is in such a different place now with our thinking of what we're going to be developing in the future and how we're going to go about it. So you're just constantly changing and improving. So it's just being really adaptable. And one thing still stands today: cash is king. So you've got to really watch those pennies and invest wisely.
Fantastic. Well, really inspiring advice, particularly because I think that it can be easy when one meets their heroes, and I put you in that category, Rob. It's easy to kind of assume that, particularly with the experience that you've had and what you've achieved and so on, it's like, oh, well, they've got all this stuff down pat and this just comes naturally. And I think it's a useful reminder for all of us that we've all got relative strengths and areas to improve, and that there's gaps that we either need other people or, a reminder on a podcast or whatever to make sure that we kind of fill in those gaps. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
One thing that we really invested in is the trademark. So, and that's what the value for Trunki was. It was all around the trademark. So we've invested in trademarking in the UK, Europe, US, China. It's kind of fairly expensive, but that's the value of the business, and it prevents competitors trying to get our trademark before we can. So that's one area I've really invested in to start building that IP portfolio, because that's where the value lies in the future.
Yeah, ultimately protecting that value, which you've created a lot of well-protected value, had to protect a lot of it over the years. Trunki, I wish you best of success for ZP and all the other products that I'm sure you're going to be developing. Where are the best places for people to learn more from you, Rob, and to follow your journey? Of course, I highly recommend people get on Amazon. If you've got kids, like in my case, I certainly agree with all the things that you said about existing kind of devices for kids around waking up and going to bed and so on. So I'm getting my ZPs. In the past, I've had my Trunki backpacks, which are amazing. And we managed to inherit some Trunki pull-on cases. So we've got those next to the ZPs. So recommend that people go to those and check out those. But any other ways?
Sure, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Rob Law. I've got my own website, roblaw.com. I'm also the author of a book, 65 Roses and the Trunki, which is my kind of business learnings married with my personal battles. So there's lots of takeaways around resilience in that book. And yeah, you can check out the new business ZP on zpzeepy.co.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for joining me, Rob. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. And to everyone else, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you found the content today valuable, and I'm sure you did, please just take 1 minute to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform or share the episode on social media and tag us in. We'd really appreciate it. And it genuinely makes a big difference for this podcast as well. So please do that. But otherwise, until next time, have fun.